I heard my own firing sentence delivered in a language my boss thought I couldn't understand. "It'll be clean," Brent murmured in Korean, the consonants clipped, casual as a weather report. "We'll say restructuring. He'll train Ethan, then we'll cut him next Friday." The break room door was half open. I was on the other side of it, forgotten paper cup cooling in my hand, listening to my manager and the visiting CEO talk over the hiss of a pod machine. Anodyne corporate posters about teamwork watch from the walls. "My name is Adrian Park. I'm 34. For the last 3 years, I've run quality control at Summit Apex Fabrication, a mid-sized aerospace supplier tucked into a warehouse district on the south side of Spokane. I grew up in Tacoma, but I spent 5 years of my teens in Daegu when my dad took a contract with a steel mill there. Those years taught me more than Hangul and street food names. They taught me to notice the spaces between words. I still think he's useful," the CEO said. His Korean had the careful cadence of a second-language speaker. "But expensive." "Useful, yes. Replaceable, certainly," Brent replied. 3 juniors for the price of 1. They didn't hear me set the cup in the sink and walk away. I reached my desk on the mezzanine and sat, fingers steepled to keep them from shaking. Below me, the shop floor sang its usual metallic song. CNC mills hummed. Coolant sluiced into trays. Fork trucks chirped their warnings. "We make precision brackets and housings that end up in aircraft interiors all over the world. I've rebuilt half of our inspection workflow since I arrived. Cut scrap rates by 11%, have customer returns, spotted a torque spec typo in a customer's drawing that would have turned into a rework nightmare. My spreadsheet from last quarter showed $280,000 in avoided costs attributed to process changes I designed." Brent took that spreadsheet to the board. He brought back a bonus letter with his name on it. A new email chimed. Subject: onboarding plan for Ethan Kim. Sent by Brent, CCing HR. "Adrian, please train Ethan on inspection software, metrology lab, vendor incoming procedures, corrective action protocols, and key customer preferences. He'll be shadowing you for 3 weeks. Thanks for being a team player." My eyes flicked to the break room glass where, minutes ago, my boss had agreed, in Korean, to let me hand Ethan every tool he'd need to replace me. Brent didn't know I'd caught him. He certainly didn't know I'd understood him. I replied as if nothing in my world had shifted. "Absolutely. I'll make sure he's fully ramped." Across the open office, Brent looked up from his glass-walled corner and gave me a thumbs up. His smile sat wrong on his face. Too fast, too easy. A few years back, when he hired me, I believed that smile. He'd been the rare manager who still walked the floor and knew how to read a surface finish with his fingertips. Then the company sold a majority stake to a Seoul-based conglomerate, and Brent learned a new habit: whispering in Korean to visiting leadership like it gave him a private channel. He'd never asked whether I could follow along. He'd never asked much of anything about me outside of numbers delivered on time. The smart move, and the one my wife would have advocated if we still spoke without watching the ground for landmines, was to dust off my resume and start sending messages. Instead, I opened a blank notebook and wrote 2 headings. What Brent thinks is true. What is actually true? Under Brent's truths I wrote: Adrian will train Ethan without complaint. Adrian can't understand Korean. Adrian won't push back. Adrian won't go digging where he shouldn't. Under my truths, I speak Korean as well as I speak English. I don't mind being underestimated. And if someone thinks he can cut me out of the company I rebuilt from the inside, he hasn't met the version of me that moved back to the States swearing I would never let anyone do to me what a steel mill did to my father. My dad was gentle in the way men who work around moving metal often are. He taught me to watch tiny signs, how a bearing sounds different an hour before it fails, how a good weld bead looks like stacked dimes. When my mother took the teaching job in Daegu and he followed for a contract, he trained a young engineer at the mill because he believed mentorship mattered. 6 months after that engineer could run the shop blindfolded, the mill restructured. My father carried his toolbox to a bus stop, shoulders rounded. He didn't cry until the bus closed its doors. I saw it through the window and made a promise I can still taste. That evening I stayed late. The floor thinned shift by shift until only the night inspector remained, tapping parts with a scribe, listening to their music like a smith from another century. I logged into systems most engineers never bother to look at: vendor approvals, purchasing workflows, expense reports. If Brent believed quality engineers never wandered outside our lane, he'd never met one who spent too many nights in Tegu learning to read the subtext in a room. Patterns look like noise until you know how to listen. A batch of invoices from a vendor I didn't recognize, Northwest Metrology Services, sat just under the internal audit trigger. The company address pointed to a mailbox store. The phone number went to a voicemail greeting recorded in a bathroom. The bank routing matched 3 other obscure vendors with names that looked borrowed from actual machine shops. Expense reports listed regional summits in Calgary and Boise on dates Brent had in fact been on the shop floor. If I'd been tasked to hide theft from auditors, I would have done exactly what I was looking at. Many small bites, never a gulp. I didn't print anything. Paper can disappear. Instead, I opened a fresh spreadsheet, keyed invoice numbers and dates, cross-referenced batch approvals with who had authority. Then I opened an encrypted folder in a cloud account Brent didn't know existed and tucked the file there. I didn't imagine I could outweed him on the fly. I intended to outweigh him. Ethan Kim arrived Monday in a cuffed shirt one size too big, eyes sparking. His handshake said he was still amazed that anyone would pay him to do work he'd done for free in his capstone. "I can't tell you how excited I am to learn from you," he said. He meant it. He was 23, fresh from Washington State. His phone wallpaper a photo of his grandmother. Brent ushered him around, narrating the shop floor like a tour guide with a script. "These are CMMs, coordinate measuring machines. They're the Cadillac of inspection." "CMMs?" Ethan asked. "Coordinate measuring machines," I said gently. "We use them when a caliper or height gauge isn't enough. I'll show you later." Brent clapped Ethan's shoulder. "Adrian knows all that old school, unsystematized stuff. You'll help us modernize." He looked at me like he was asking my permission to replace me. I smiled as if I was delighted to build my own guillotine. The first week, I taught Ethan everything Brent had listed and everything Brent didn't think mattered. How to read a vendor's eyes when they drop off a lot and they won't make eye contact with the inspector. How to hold a micrometer so you don't warm it and stretch the thimble with your skin. How to tell when a surface finish looks like the drawing requirement but feels wrong under your nail. He listened like someone putting a life together one instruction at a time. At lunch, he told me Brent had messaged him personally after a career fair. He said Summit Apex needed someone with my language skills. Ethan said. "It felt cool, you know, like he saw me." "Mandarin," I guessed. "Korean," he grinned. "My parents made me go to Saturday school. I hated it then. I'm grateful now." I nodded, neutral. If Brent wanted a bilingual junior, he wanted cover for conversations he'd grown used to having without anyone in quality following along. He wanted a bridge to soul that wasn't me. Wednesday, midweek, I tested the fence. "Hey, Brent," I said in the staff meeting, sliding a few lines of numbers onto the big screens. "I've been reviewing incoming invoices while training Ethan. There are some oddities, vendors I can't match to parts, and approvals and batches that don't line up with receiving. Could be nothing, but it'd be good to coordinate with accounting." Brent made a show of chuckling. "Let's not overcomplicate, Adrian. The finance team reconciles that data. We need you focused on floor issues. Customers want lead time reductions. That's where your eyes should be." I let my mouth twitch a half smile. His shoulders loosened a notch. He thought he'd shooed the sheep back into the pen. That night, I studied travel logs. Brent's expense reports listed hotels and cities he hadn't flown to. Our calendar system showed him booked in internal meetings on those same days. If I could pull corporate card statements, I could map the theft completely. I couldn't. Without a subpoena or a complicit controller, all I could do was assemble the outline and know, like you know a part is out at first glance, that the picture was solid even if the dimensions weren't yet inked by an auditor's stamp. By the end of week 1, I knew how Brent planned to narrate my exit. He used the phrase fresh energy twice in a day. He told the CEO that Ethan was hungry, that he spoke our parent company's language, that he was the future. When I offered to join a supplier call scheduled for Thursday, Brent said, "Actually, I'll take this one with Ethan. Let's get him exposure." "Good call," I said, even as I noted the pattern, isolating me from relationships I'd built so he could claim later that customers hadn't noticed I was gone. On Friday night, when the floor lights fell to half and the mills idled, I stayed again. Brent's fake vendor trail widened with every hour of cross-checking. The names he'd chosen made me laugh out loud once: Regional Calibration Alliance and Mountain View Metrology. Because a man scamming $300 here and $1,100 there still had enough vanity to brand his imaginary companies like they were a club he wanted to belong to. Week 2. Ethan began to ask questions. Real ones. Why do some vendors get approved with just one manager's sign-off when the policy says two? Why did Brent tell me to email him invoices directly instead of uploading them into the system like you showed me? Why would we pay for calibration services when our own gauges are in tolerance? He wasn't naive. He was observant. That scared me more than if he'd been dull. Honest people can be used without knowing. Honest, observant people can also become allies if you show them where to look. I didn't dirty his hands, but I didn't lie. Policy exists, I said carefully, so that no one person can push money out the door without a second set of eyes. When someone dodges policy, you should ask yourself why. He nodded, jaw tight. Okay. On Thursday afternoon, Ethan mentioned that Brent had asked if he'd be comfortable translating during certain meetings when Mr. Cho visited. Since you know, some people have trouble expressing nuance in English. Brent hadn't asked me to translate in over a year. Now I knew why. He believed he had replaced the only person in the building who could follow his Korean. He was wrong. Friday morning my phone buzzed with a calendar update. Mr. Cho's quarterly visit was moving up by a week. He'd arrive Wednesday. Brent added a 2-hour block on Thursday titled in English, Strategic Session. No invitees besides himself. I closed my office door, leaned back in my chair, and let myself breathe. The timing was perfect. If I waited for him to pull the trigger and then brought evidence, it would look like revenge. If I confronted him today, he would deny and isolate me further before Cho arrived. But if I walked into that strategic session with a translator's courtesy and an auditor's file, I could ensure the right ears heard the right truth in the right language. Over the weekend, I built a binder that would make any program manager proud. Tabs labeled in both languages. Summaries first, exhibits behind them. Invoice printouts with bank routing numbers highlighted and traced. Screen captures of Northwest Metrology's mailbox store address, next to a photo of the strip mall it lived in. A list of travel dates with screenshots from our own calendar system showing Brent on site the same days he'd claimed to be in Boise, Calgary, Reno. I added a memo summarizing all instances in which Brent had told me in English to stay in my lane when it touched money. Then I wrote a letter in Korean addressed to Mr. Cho and summarized everything in a page and a half. I didn't accuse in that letter. I stated. I put dates next to verbs. Wednesday morning, Mr. Cho's sedan rolled into the lot. He walked in crisp as always. He is a man who does not use more words than necessary. When I first met him, I thought him cold. Later I learned that he grew up in a family where quiet was respect. He shook hands, bowed slightly, asked about throughput, waste, safety, all the right things. Brent at his shoulder translated concepts Cho didn't need help translating. He did it anyway, inserting himself in any gap where significance could slide. That afternoon Brent called me in. We should talk about where you fit, he said, performing compassion like a script he'd practiced. Corporate is looking at efficiency. Ethan's integration has gone very well. His language skills are important to our future. After this visit, we'll do a small restructure. You'll receive a fair package. No one in this room is upset. The last line was my favorite. He'd already emptied emotion from it to make it easy to file and forget. Understood, I said. I'll make sure the transition is seamless. Relief softened his face. He thought that was the end. Of me, anyway. Thursday morning, 10 minutes into the strategic session, I knocked on the door and let the Korean roll off my tongue like the first language it became when I was 15 and evading security guards to watch high school baseball behind chain link. "Cheongna," I said. "Excuse me. Ju 대표님께 전달드릴 필요가 있습니다." "Mr. Cho, I have documents you should review." Brent blinked like he'd swallowed coffee wrong. Cho looked up, alert. "Pagdri," he said, addressing me with the title he'd last used when I'd briefed him a year ago. "Musin jerumika." "What documents?" "Jinan tuyungan singing din gungabupche gurije nerka gungbi chari gunburuchinga." Discrepancies in vendor payments and expense approvals over the last 2 years. I set the binder on the table. Brent stood so quickly his chair snagged on the carpet. "Adrian, out," he said in English. "Now." Cho didn't look at him. He flipped the first tab, scanned the first page, then the second. He frowned and motioned to the chair across from him. Unz, he said to me. Sit. To Brent, in Korean now, he said, why do you look surprised to see these materials? Brent recovered a piece of his mask. He said too quickly. It's a misunderstanding. Adriani. Gachai gungabubche at Amerbushib show. I said. Look at the fake vendor names. Jusanin Sasangimida. Uming Gejanin Gaten Ranger Sanamida. Singing Gamegan Nebu Kamsa Gijinsan Araru Machidoesamida. Singing Gamegan Nebu Kamsa Gijinsan Araru Machidoesamida. The addresses are mailboxes. The bank accounts share routing. Approval amounts sit just below internal audit thresholds. Cho turned the page. His eyes moved faster. He nodded once, the kind of nod that says he's already 2 steps ahead. Gungbi, he said. Expenses. Buichijo. I slid the highlighted calendar comparison toward him. He claimed Boise that day. Our internal calendar shows him in a staff meeting here. Brent tried one more pivot. Adrian has been under immense stress about the restructure. He's fabricating. Itur junhugisharesa hashin mardu, jiga dajaratsamida. I said quietly. I heard everything you said in the break room 2 days ago. Your plan to fire me and how you'd sell the transition. Cho's head turned slowly. When he spoke, his voice lost the softness it usually contained. Dangshin, hangaga mutagu jur, he said to Brent. You told me he didn't speak Korean. Brent's mouth worked. I didn't know, he stammered in English. He never said. He didn't have to say. Cho replied, and for the first time since I'd worked under his ownership, I heard anger. What happened next moved with a cool efficiency that made me appreciate why Cho had risen as far as he had. He dialed a number on his cell. The corporate auditor answered on the first ring. Cho spoke 5 sentences in Korean. 10 minutes later, 2 internal audit staffers from our Seattle satellite were on a video call. I was already scanning the top page of the PDF I'd emailed them before I came into the room. Cho asked me to walk them through the highlights. I did. Brent tried to sit. Cho told him to stand. They reviewed vendor registrations, cross-checked EANs, and in 15 minutes confirmed what I'd spent nights assembling. Shell vendors with traceable connections to Brent, travel claims that didn't match badge swipes and calendar entries, regional seminars that could not have happened because the supposed associations didn't exist. When Brent said accounting had approved, we pulled approval logs. He'd consolidated approvals under a delegated authority when the controller went on leave. He'd kept that authority after she returned. Security came an hour later with a box. Brent packed the framed photo of his boat and the fake smile he used when he talked to people he didn't need. He wasn't handcuffed in our lobby. That would happen later, after the auditor finished building the criminal part of the file, after corporate counsel sent our packet to the county, after Cho pulled the call logs that showed Brent speaking to a supplier we'd dropped for ethics concerns 2 years ago. He left. The room felt the way a shop feels after a bearing is pressed out. Relieved, the scrape finally gone quiet. For the rest of the day, everything moved in concentric circles. HR sent a carefully worded email about a leadership change. The controller came to my desk with eyes wide and said, I knew something wasn't right. I couldn't prove it. Ethan walked up to me like he was approaching a cliff. I didn't know, he said softly. He asked me to translate. I thought he didn't finish. He didn't need to. I clapped a hand on his shoulder. You're not at fault, I said. But you know better now what to watch for. Cho asked me into the same conference room at 5 o'clock when the shop lights had gone to glow. He folded his hands, studied me for a long breath, then said in English, Mr. Park, we would like you to step into an interim role. Director of Quality and Compliance. It is not only your skill we need. It is your judgment. I'll accept, I said, because I'd prayed to be in a position to make sure no one slipped money through a machine again while we were all looking at parts. I have conditions, I added. His eyebrows lifted. Transparent vendor approval. Separation of purchasing and approvals. Quarterly internal audits that include random pulls from below the threshold. No single person can grant themselves delegated authority. And all leadership conversations that affect headcount or ethics will be documented and translated when necessary. Secrecy is where rock grows. He nodded slowly. Then he smiled the small smile I had misread years ago. Good. Brent was charged within the month. Embezzlement. Wire fraud. He pled out in exchange for a reduced sentence and a restitution plan that would chase his retirement until he died. His LinkedIn went quiet. Someone told me he took a job in another state under a different last name. It didn't matter. The industry remembers. The industry talks. Ethan stayed. He asked questions like an auditor and learned inspection like a machinist. He never again accepted a shortcut because it was offered by someone with a title. When we set up bilingual training for auditors in Seoul, he taught one module with me. We wrote policy in both languages and published it on a portal no one could lock behind a manager's office door. 6 months later, I stood in the window on the mezzanine and watched a young inspector run a part under the CMM stylus. He moved with careful efficiency, eyes tracking the probe like he was reading a poem. On the floor below, Maria from shipping laughed at something a forklift driver said. Sun came in through the bay door and hit the coolant in a tank at an angle that made the surface flash silver green. I thought of my father standing at a bus stop with his toolbox. If there is such a thing as justice, it is not a single loud act. It is a series of choices, one after another, made in the open. People asked me later how it felt to get revenge. I don't know that revenge is the right word. Revenge is a door you kick in and then stand on the splinters to feel tall. What I wanted was balance. What I wanted was a company where a man's quiet theft couldn't last until it hollowed the place out. What I wanted was for a junior engineer to learn that language fluency isn't just about words. It's about knowing when to speak and when to stay still and when silence becomes complicity. I think about that morning in the break room sometimes, the hiss of the pod machine, the sound of Brent's confidence when he thought he owned the frame around the picture he was painting. The truth is, he wasn't wrong that efficiency matters. He wasn't wrong that companies need juniors. He was wrong about what is replaceable. You can buy a newer machine. You can hire 3 interns. You cannot replace the invisible net of trust woven through a staff that knows someone is watching the right things for the right reasons. The day my promotion became permanent, Mr. Cho brought me a pin from his briefcase. Matte black, heavy, cut with the company's name in microscopic letters around the cap. For signing the new controls, he said. Then in Korean, softer so only I would hear, Karigu gumuptana. And thank you. Chomaneo, I said. You're welcome. I thought he meant for catching a thief. Later, I realized he meant for speaking at the precise moment when speaking mattered more than keeping my head down. News of Brent's fall made its way through the industry circuit fast, as such things do. It turned up as a cautionary case study at a Western Supplier Council breakfast. A consultant used it in a webinar about duty segregation. A competitor's HR manager told me over coffee, "We tightened our approval limits after we heard about your situation. You might have kept my controller out of prison without knowing it." That made me laugh in a way that shook something loose in my chest. At home, my wife and I talked like people building a bridge back toward each other one beam at a time. She had held her breath for years watching me hemorrhage evenings into work. When I told her what I'd done, she didn't celebrate. She put her palm against my cheek and said, "I didn't marry a martyr. I married a builder. Don't forget which one you are." I wrote that on a sticky note on my monitor where I could see it when the shop noise got so familiar I thought it was silence. Ethan moved out of inspection after a year and into supplier development. He calls me sometimes from a vendor's floor with a question that's really 3 questions. How do you know the difference between a good machine running hot and a bad machine hiding a problem? What do you say when a vendor is lying without lying? I tell him versions of the same thing every time. Listen hard. Don't confuse confidence with competence. And when your stomach flips, trust it. Your body knows before your brain catches up. We installed a new system the quarter after Brent left. It pings me anytime a vendor approval threshold is crossed. It pings Ethan. It pings a controller. Sometimes I look at all those pings and think about the first tab in my binder that day. You can build a company on brilliant ideas and better machines. You keep a company alive with boring systems that mean one man's ambition can't wreck the place while everyone's facing the other way. 2 summers after that day in the break room, I flew to Seoul with Ethan for a joint audit. On a Saturday, we had free time. We took the KTX down to Daegu, so I could walk the neighborhood where my father used to stop for cold barley tea on his way home from the mill. The shop was still there. The woman behind the counter was older. "You're taller," she said to me, in Korean, as if I'd just come in from high school. "That's what time does," I said. Ethan bought a bag of roasted chestnuts and asked how I'd learned to chew on words like the way he'd seen me do in that conference room. "I learned this here," I said, tapping the counter, gesturing out toward the street where buses had always been full and the air in summer always smelled faintly of iron. I learned that when someone tells you who they are in one language and a different person in another, you believe the one who's less comfortable, not the one with the better words. I learned the difference between patience and passivity. People confuse those, too. We laughed. Then we rode back north, the train carving the country in controlled curves, the landscape moving clean and fast. On Monday, when I walked into our Spokane plant and the floor hummed like an instrument tuned as tight as I could get it, I thought about the first sentence I'd heard in that break room and how sentences can be openings, not endings. "It'll be clean," Brent had said. He was wrong about that, too. It wasn't clean, but it was honest. Honesty doesn't always feel like victory. Sometimes it feels like a weight you're strong enough to carry. Sometimes it sounds like a binder snapping shut. Sometimes it's a word in a language a man never thought you'd understand, and you wrap your hand around it and hold it up to the light, and in that light you see exactly what to do next.